I'm calling to order this hearing, a roundtable of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council, Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. The time is 12:48 in the afternoon, and we're holding this hearing a roundtable in room 500, the council chambers of the John A. Wilson Building. The subject of this hearing or roundtable is PR 26-342. Which is a reprogramming request disapproval resolution of 2025, which I introduced on October 8th last week. The council is time limited in how much time we have to review reprogrammings, which is why this roundtable has been scheduled quickly. And the record will be open for 1 week. That is, it will close at 5:30 p.m. on Thursday, October 23rd. This reprogramming request disapproval resolution is to disapprove reprogramming number 26-70, which was submitted to the council on, I believe, September 29th. And actually, why don't I just read from the hearing notice? The stated purpose of PR 26-342 is to disapprove reprogramming request number 26-70. On September 29, 2025, I introduced reprogramming request number 26-70 at the request of the mayor. The reprogramming request would shift $90.2 million in fiscal year 2025 local funds from various agencies to other agencies such as the District Department of Transportation, the Department of Behavioral Health, and the Department of General Services to address, quote, higher than anticipated costs, unquote. The reprogramming request does not adequately explain why certain agencies or programs incurred these higher than anticipated costs. Additionally, most of the funds that would be reprogrammed are coming from repayment of loans and interest, i.e. debt service, and the request does not adequately explain why debt service has an available balance of at least $84.4 million. As such, the purpose of this roundtable is twofold. First, to get greater detail from the executive as to why specific agencies and programs are incurring higher than anticipated costs. And second, to better understand why debt service has been over budgeted. So I'll leave it at that and turn to the two witnesses, Jenny Reed, who's the Director of the Office of Budget and Performance Management for the Mayor, and Eric Kennedy, who's the Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the Office of Budget and Planning within the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Do you all have statements? So you just want me to ask you questions?
Correct.
Yes. What if I don't have any questions? But I do.
I think you do.
Okay, give me a second here. So I'm just going to go through the reprogramming. I did find it kind of curious that the way the reprogramming was characterized in the mayor's submission was about how this is to get money to the police department and the deputy mayor for public safety and justice and Homeland Security, all three of which are public safety agencies, which account for roughly $5.5 million of this $90 million reprogramming request, as opposed to having characterized it differently, which would be to get money to, Department of Transportation, $26 million, or the Department of General Services, $18.4 million, because this is really much more about getting them money. Those two together equal roughly half of what the reprogramming request was. So why don't we just start with Department of Transportation? The documentation we received says to reprogram $26 million to the Department of Transportation for, quote, higher than anticipated costs, unquote, for overtime, maintenance for the capital bike share contract, the clear lanes, WMATA services, and less than anticipated earnings on indirect cost recovery. What is that? And what is that?
Sure. Happy to answer. Thank you for having me today, Chairman Mendelson. And just for the record, my name is Jenny Reed, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Mayor's Budget Director. DDOT, as you mentioned, experienced about $26 million in higher than anticipated costs. I believe that number is now trending downwards, a little bit below $20 million, just based on some additional work that DDOT and the OCFO are doing. But it's really driven by three factors. The first and largest is around indirect cost recovery. So as you know, Chairman, when agencies have federal grants, they're often allowed to charge a specific rate of sort of overhead or admin costs to the grant that's known as indirect cost recovery. This fiscal year, the Federal Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, changed what was allowed to be billed as IDCR, indirect cost recovery. They changed and disallowed expenditures that had been charged to grants as IDCR for many, many years in a row. And so unfortunately, those costs could no longer be billed to the federal grants, and they had to be billed to local funds because these are, covering positions and sort of overhead costs that the agency must incur for a lot of capital projects. Another change that happened was that DDOT has really been working on a lot more what they call mega projects. Think about like the I-395 bridge rehabilitation. Typically, mega projects are not awarded IDCR, right? So they typically don't come with IDCR rates. So a couple things that DDOT has been doing while seeing this pressure. One, they've been working directly with Federal Highway Administration to secure specialized IDCR rates for mega projects. And they have already been awarded one for that I-395 bridge. They're currently working to see if they can get a negotiated IDCR rate for some other mega projects that should help offset some of the costs. And then looking at what are other costs that maybe haven't been charged to the grant that we could potentially charge, looking at, costs that we're already paying. So I believe that in FY26, this pressure will be much smaller. I'm not sure if it will completely go away, but we are working with the agency right now to better understand how we can maximize the IDCR recovery and not have to have this hit local funds. The second area of pressure is capital bike share. So due to continuous system expansion and greater usage of the Cabby for All program, the program did not recover enough revenues based on operating costs. So there's a certain amount of fixed costs that go into capital bike share that are just exist. And so as a result of collecting less revenue than anticipated, seeing higher utilization, higher fixed costs, the program ran a pressure. Now, the good news is DDOT has made some changes this fiscal year that should help address this going forward. So one, they implemented some new rates starting on August 1st that should raise the overall amount of revenue for the program. And secondly, implemented monthly usage caps on the Cabby for All program. We believe, and they believe, that based on these two changes, we should see the program be able to sustain itself in FY26. The last area for DDOT, and this will be a continual theme that we should probably address separately, is around overtime. So DDOT, about 2.9 million of the pressure is related to overtime expenses for unplanned events, special events, school crossing guard shortages, things like that. So those are the three main drivers of DDOT's pressure.
So what is the IDCR component of this reprogramming?
Well, the IDCR was initially projected to be about a $17 million cost. It's now looking like it's going to be closer to 12.5 million. The capital bike share was 7 million. And when it started, it's now closer to 1.6. And as I mentioned, overtime is about 2.9. So the total we're looking at now is closer to 17 million.
So, USDOT said we're reducing the indirect cost recovery.
They didn't reduce it. They said certain expenses that we have charged to IDCR for several years were no longer eligible.
And when did they decide that?
They were beginning to have, I would have to ask the agency.
Well, was it January or was it September?
It was not September, but I don't know. I'd have to ask the agency when they first started having those discussions.
I don't understand with capital bike share. So, the revenues are not structured to cover the fixed costs?
When the program was originally established, the revenues were sufficient to cover the cost of the program. But as it has expanded, they no longer keep up with the total cost of the program. So we are having to add local dollars.
That doesn't make sense to me. So what are fixed costs? We contract for this, right? So I mean, the fixed costs are on the contractor, aren't they?
The fixed costs are covered on the contract, but the revenues, as we've expanded, the revenues that we are collecting are not sufficient to cover all of the costs. Some of that has been lower revenues than anticipated and higher utilization than anticipated. If you want to go into the details of the contract, I would need to circle back with DDOT and then come back to you with further.
Well, we're being
answers.
asked to approve a reprogramming. It's kind of useful to understand why there are this overspending. So, I'm kind of confused here because, I'm trying to think of what fixed costs are. They would be the, stations where the bicycles are
Mhm,
and the bicycles.
mhm.
Maybe all of the IT that's behind the system that makes it possible for people to rent and pay. I would think the fixed costs are on the contractor, not on DDOT, right? DDOT doesn't own any of that.
DDOT does pay for some portion of it, and
Does
so
DDOT own any of it? I don't,
that, I don't believe so.
okay, so it's all by contract. So the fixed costs are, for one thing, fixed costs. Well, I suppose if you get more bicycles, you have more fixed costs.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if the revenue is appropriate for 10 bicycles, it should be appropriate for 100 bicycles.
Mhm.
I would
So
think.
the revenues that DDOT anticipated to come in to cover CABI were lower than expected.
Why is that?
They were forecasted to be a certain dollar amount. They did not collect that much. I would need to talk to DDOT to understand where those revenue declines were. The other challenge was the CABI for All program, which is a subsidized program so that people can enjoy capital bike share. The utilization on that program was higher than DDOT anticipated, and that's why DDOT has done two things to correct for this that we hope will now make the program more self-sustaining, which is they changed the fares beginning August 1st, and they've implemented monthly caps on usage for the CABI for All program. I will also share that in the past several years, there has been sweeps of fund balance in their SPR account. And so while I do think that they will be okay for 26, they probably will need an infusion of local funds in FY 27.
Now, who did the sweep? Did the mayor propose that?
The sweep was from council about 3 years ago. It was about $5 million.
And what the council did 3 years ago is part of the problem today?
Not part of the problem today, but it will be an issue in FY 27. So while I believe for FY26, the program should be okay, for FY27, I believe they will need an infusion of local funds
All
in
right,
order to sustain the program.
So that confuses me as well. If there's a special purpose fund available, why can't the special purpose fund cover the 1.6 million that's needed?
So the special purpose revenue fund is available, but some of that fund balance has already been budgeted for use in FY26. So if we were to change that in FY25, it would just shift where the pressure is.
Okay, shift the pressure to next year.
Yes.
Okay. What's wrong with that?
We'd rather solve it now.
Say more about the overtime. For unplanned events, so I'm assuming an unplanned event is unplanned.
Mhm.
But then you also said crossing guards, and there was something else that was overtime?
So it could be special events, it could be staffing shortages, right? Needing to cover shifts for folks who are not there. I do think overtime, we should talk about as a separate category altogether because it is an issue that we have been trying to take a lot of steps to work on. And I do think there needs to be some collaboration between us and the council to really be able to tackle this head on. But the main drivers of overtime at all agencies tend to revolve around sort of three major buckets. One is staffing shortages, right? We all know that there's hard to fill positions in district government, and we have a lot of agencies that have mandatory staffing levels. The second is around really increased demand for services. And we've seen that particularly for a lot of our public safety agencies. And then the third bucket is around leave usage, needing to backfill for leave usage and manage of leave usage. And so those are kind of the three different areas that we need to tackle in a lot of these agencies. Some we can do faster than others, but it is something that's going to take policy changes. It's going to take funding changes, and it's going to take execution changes.
Well, why isn't another approach possible, which is to simply say, we're not going to spend the overtime, so we're not going to meet the increased demand? Why isn't that possible? Or with the leave, I'm guessing that sounds reminiscent of discussion back in March regarding the universal paid leave,
Mhm.
whatever it's called for the district employees.
Mhm.
And my impression is that agencies sometimes are not very rigorous about examining whether it's justified. So the fact that I say that I need to take leave because I'm pregnant, well, maybe I'm not. Maybe that's an extreme example, but my impression is that there maybe is usage of that isn't warranted, and agencies aren't being rigorous enough.
So I think the agencies are being rigorous. I think the volume of work and requests that they need to review is fairly substantial. And I do think
Wait a minute, say that again. The volume
the
of
volume of
requests for leave?
processing of the leave requests is substantial. It has increased in utilization. And there are some policy changes that we think we need to have so that agencies can better manage their operations. The reality is for a lot of our agencies that have mandatory staffing levels, particularly our public safety agencies, the usage of leave has gone up substantially in the agencies, and they are required to backfill those positions because they have to have people there. So they have to use overtime in order to cover those positions. There are, I think, some really sensible changes that could be made. Those were the changes that we submitted as part of the Budget Support Act. Those were not approved by council. They were taken out. But to give you an example of something, right now, you can request leave on your first day on the job. And that does happen. What we have proposed is a 180-day waiting period. So I think we do need to have a larger conversation about leave usage. And I would really encourage the council to be speaking to its directors that they have oversight over, because this is a real problem. We have proposed potential solutions. Council took them out, but there's no alternative. And it's not just better management. Of course, we can always keep doing better. Of course, we did try to put 2 positions at the Office of Risk Management 2 years ago to help agencies do better oversight. Those were also taken by the council. So we have tried several strategies to address overtime in addition to the ones that we can control, but they're not getting any traction. And so overtime is a serious issue. It's a morale issue. It's a suitability issue. And we really need to tackle this.
So if this is that important, why didn't the mayor introduce that subtitle as standalone legislation?
So we introduced it as part of the Budget Support Act. It made sense to us to go along with it because we were also adding significant amounts of money for overtime for agencies.
But that wasn't my question.
And then my understanding was that the council said they were going to take it out and they were going to introduce it as a standalone bill.
So you're expecting the council to introduce it as a standalone bill?
I'm saying that we need to work together on reforms.
Well,
That
just
would
help
help.
me here. You think that that legislative proposal was a good proposal. I'm remembering that I believe the CFO in the fiscal impact statement for the BSA said there was no savings associated with it. So the subtitle wasn't necessary for the budget to be approved balanced. I believe there was discussion at an open meeting about how there were arguments on both sides of the issue and that it ought to be considered as freestanding. I don't remember that, because I was the one who usually committed to this, that I don't remember committing that I would introduce the subtitle. I think it was, if the mayor thinks this is so important, why doesn't she introduce this as freestanding bill? So do you want me to introduce it? I'll be happy to do that.
That would be great.
Hold on a second, I'm embarrassing myself. It's pending in this case. You should. Okay. All right, so I stand or sit corrected. Apparently I did introduce the subtitles, so it's a freestanding bill.
Great.
Maybe we can separately approach the chair of the Committee on Executive and Administrative EAL and Labor and press her to have a hearing on it.
Sounds good.
But for example, you said increased demand with regard to the overtime. Why doesn't an agency say, no, we're not going to expand the program, the budget isn't there? Why isn't that an option?
So particularly for overtime, saying no could have real public safety or health consequences. So if DDOT is saying no, if there's a special event, that could mean that there's no traffic safety officers to help direct traffic. If MPD says no, that could mean fewer officers out on the street.
Well, but is there any real examination of how to provide those services for an event?
So
Then instead of our doing the gold standard approach toward this event, we'll do the silver standard approach to this event. Is that taking place?
there.
You said increased demand. Is that just simply special events or is that other things?
It's other things as well. So it could be, in the case of DDOT, right, it's special events and it's needing to backfill, like if there's an absence of school crossing guards. For MPD, it's very different, right? It's driven by demands for service and needing to deploy. Now, what the correct staffing level should be for special events is really not something that can answer. That's a question for the police chief, the fire chief,
But
et
what if
cetera.
the DDOT director isn't asking that question? We are talking about DDOT, not MPD here.
Sure.
What if the DDOT director isn't asking that question?
I have no reason to think the DDOT director isn't asking that question. There's a
Why
group of
would
agencies that
they-
work together to figure out what is the right deployment for special events.
Well, wait a minute. I said gold standard, silver standard. So for one thing, I'm not confident that the DDOT director is asking that question. And there's apparently no process other than relying on the agency director in terms of whether they're meeting the need in the most economical way. And I phrased it that way on purpose, meeting the need in the most economical way. So for example, I have seen DDOT trucks, maybe they're DPW trucks,
Probably DPW.
that are parked around the Willard on 14th Street when there's some federal event and
Mhm.
they want to provide extra protection. I have also seen DDOT trucks or DPW trucks parked on 14th Street, blocking off 14th Street when there's like a demonstration or a parade.
Mhm.
The Willard trucks are not occupied and the 14th Street trucks are occupied. If they can be unoccupied at the Willard, why can't they be unoccupied on 14th Street?
That would be a question for the agency directors who are planning the security
Okay,
for
so
the
who's
special
asking-
event.
Who's asking that question?
What do you mean, who's asking that
The
question?
question I just asked. Who's asking that question within the executive?
The agencies that meet as part of the Special Events Task Force are always working to figure out what is the right deployment that's necessary to protect the health and safety of
Is that
residents and
A
visitors.
deployment of, in this example, a truck or a deployment of a truck with a person? So if there's going to be a reprogramming
Mhm.
that's going to pay for it, then why even bother to ask the question? If it's the overtime's going to get paid for,
Mhm.
then why not just go ahead and have an employee sit in the truck for 8 hours when there doesn't need to be an employee sitting in the truck?
I don't believe that's how agencies approach managing their overtime budget. And it is certainly not how we approach managing overall overtime. Now, what I will say is that we have been working very closely with agencies, at least over the past year and a half, on overtime and looking at all of these different factors that go into why an agency's overtime budget is what it is. And there are a lot of different ways that we can begin to control costs. However, they take some time. Most of them do not have an impact overnight. And so while we are working to figure out what is the ideal staffing ratio to overtime budget based on what the demands for service are, there are going to be needs to continue to add local monies until we can get to that right staffing complement. That's going to take some time.
So let me ask you this question on DDOT. So the request is for 26 million to the Department of Transportation.
Mhm.
But you've identified that the need is now 17 million.
Mhm.
So why are we reprogramming? I am really slow.
26.
Yeah, but I was trying to do the difference. 26. Why are we reprogramming $9 million more than we need to?
So at the time that the reprogramming was submitted, we did think that it was going to be 26. We did possibly think some of it would come down. However, because this is an end of year reprogramming, we needed to make sure that the agency would be able to cover all of its expenses. Since the reprogramming has been submitted, now some of the costs have come down. That's happened in the only two areas in this reprogramming, this and DBH. And as we continue to move through the fiscal year, you start to see numbers really crystallize, right? The
So that explains to me why the numbers are changing. But the council's being asked to approve putting $9 million into DDOT more than it needs.
Mhm. Well, Chairman, I think part of the challenge is the timing. We don't have a lot of time to complete these reprogrammings before the end of the fiscal year.
All right, let's talk about Department of Behavioral Health. So the reprogramming request says, due to higher than anticipated costs, due to increased utilization of Medicaid eligible services driven by increased rates and increased overtime costs. None of that was foreseeable when we had the budget?
So when we were formulating the budget, we did institute in FY '25 and in FY '26 caps on the number of hours that providers could bill for this specific type of community-based service, because we saw that it was driving up the costs. Even with those caps in place, however, the utilization has remained significantly higher as more providers are entering the market. And so as a result, we are still seeing the pressure here. On overtime, this is an area that's being driven largely by the St. Elizabeth's facility, which is, a mandatory staffing agency as well. Same sort of suite of issues that lead to the need for more overtime there. And so that is something we will be working with the agency as well as DDOT and all the other agencies to see what is the right path to get on what we consider an appropriate number of overtime hours versus filled positions.
I might have missed something there. Why are they having an overtime issue
At St. Elizabeth's?
at St. Elizabeth's?
At St. Elizabeth's.
And there are vacancies there?
Correct. Correct. There's
Okay.
leave
And-
usage. There's the St. Elizabeth's facility is full, completely full.
How much of the 24 million is St. Elizabeth's?
I think it's about 14.
14.
It's now down
It
to,
was 14.
it's now down to about 14 from 24.
Oh, this is entirely a St. Elizabeth's issue.
No,
Oh.
the majority of it, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so the 10 million. that
You
was
have a
the
microphone, you
personnel-
can,
Oh, I think roughly four. It's
For
Yeah.
St. Elizabeth's?
four, roughly 4.3 million for overtime.
say that again,
Roughly 4.3 million for overtime.
is St. Elizabeth's.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the main driver of overtime in the Department of Behavioral Health is staffing at St. Elizabeth's.
Okay, the request is 24 million.
Yes,
And earlier you said it's actually come down.
correct.
What's it down to?
It's about 14 now.
14, 1-4.
Mhm.
And of the 14, 4.3 is overtime
Mhm.
at St. Elizabeth's.
Correct.
What are the other components of the 14?
The other component is the demand for the Medicaid eligible services. And that's the service where we did put a cap on the number of hours that could be billed because we saw just a significant increase in utilization. Even with those caps, which were put in place for FY '25, I believe they started in December or January when we first began to really see like the spike in utilization. And we put further caps in place for FY '26. The usage, though, in FY '25 has still continued to be higher than we anticipated because more providers are entering the market. So the caps are there, but there's more people utilizing the service. This is an area that we've been working very closely with the Department of Behavioral Health and the Department of Healthcare Finance on, and we will continue to have discussions with them about what are the appropriate guardrails we can put in place to prevent this from such a significant jump year after year.
So 9.7 million is this increase in Medicaid eligible services?
Mhm.
My math is correct?
approximately.
Yes.
Yes, approximately.
St. Elizabeth's has a number of vacant positions.
St. Elizabeth's does have vacant positions. They also have staff out on leave. They're hard to fill positions. That's why I think, a lot of the levers are pretty much the same for every agency in terms of what drives overtime, but which lever is the driving force can be somewhat different. So that's why I say we should really have a focused discussion on overtime itself.
So which lever is greater at St. Elizabeth's, vacancies or leave?
If you give me a minute, I can follow up with that answer. Just have to look it up.
If it's 10 seconds,
It'll be more than 10 seconds. Ask me another question and I'll answer. I would say on DBH, I don't have the exact percentage breakdown, but I will say the three main drivers of DBH's overtime are hard to fill positions, high numbers of people on non-work status, and increased use of a safety suite, which requires a higher staffing to patient ratio.
of safety suite.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I might have a sense of what that means. With regard to the vacant positions, do you know offhand how many vacant positions or roughly how many?
I don't have that, but we can
Okay.
certainly get that for you.
Well, you said some are hard to fill.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember, when we were talking about DDOT, you said there were staff shortages. That would be vacant positions,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Yes.
May I also add that if you recall, during FY '25, agencies were put under a hiring and spending freeze as a result of the CR. So we had a lot of agencies that were not able to hire in FY '25 because of that hiring and spending freeze. Now, we did exempt a lot of frontline positions, but there were still delays in hiring in some agencies.
So some of our overtime is attributable to the $1 billion that Congress stole from us, which, just for the record, is not an accurate statement. They
Correct.
didn't take the money,
Just
they
the-
just wouldn't let us spend it.
That's
But
correct.
I still want to be kind of snarky. But so some of this overtime is due to that.
Yes, because we're unable to fill some of the positions.
So to what extent, or is it an issue that funds for hiring are not available to the agency because the CFO pulls them back to cover overtime?
Well, it's a constant challenge, right? I mean, because there is the need for the CFO to be, I won't speak for them, to.
Yeah, Chairman, when you say we hold the positions back for vacancy savings, I'm not quite sure I understand.
Really?
Well, I think I do. I just want to make sure I understand. Are you saying that in order for them to meet their vacancy savings requirement, that they can only hire a certain number of positions during a given fiscal year?
Something like that.
Okay, so that decision actually is made by while we do have a vacancy savings policy, but it is the program staff that will tell us that in order for us to achieve this, we have to do this. If we can't achieve it, then if they don't think they can achieve it, then we can get a waiver. They can get a waiver from our policy. We do work with, obviously, the agencies and Jenny's staff to ensure as best as possible that the vacancy savings that is taken in the budget is appropriate. But we don't actually go in and say, you can't fill this, you can't fill that. We leave that to.
Ms. Reed kind of let it slip and said it was a challenge. So I'm just going to pick up on that. I seem to remember years ago talking to an agency about why they weren't filling positions, and they were not allowed to because even though the positions were funded, the agency fiscal officer, the associate CFO, somebody said, we need to hold this money.
Okay, so I'm going to try to expand on what you said.
But you know what I'm talking about.
I do. And so what happens is so vacancy savings is taken at the agency level. So at the position level, you may have budget for a given position. However, at the agency level, you said we need a 8% vacancy savings. That is a culmination of all of your positions and when you plan to hire, whether they're full or vacant, and if they're vacant, they get wrapped into the vacancy savings. So you may have a position that you budgeted for, but because you take a vacancy savings rate at the agency level, you have to hold the agency to a certain amount of hiring or a certain amount of hiring to meet that vacancy savings rate. Now, I will say this, in FY '28, we will be taking vacancy savings in the budget at the position level versus the agency level, which means you will know which positions are affected by that vacancy savings rate versus holding the agency to this vacancy savings rate, which could impact a myriad of positions. So that's why you typically hear what you almost always hear, which is, especially when the council gets the budget, there is this vacancy savings rate. And while you may see a line there for the budget, but we need to hold that in order to meet that vacancy savings rate.
You said the practice is going to change in FY
In
'26?
'28, with our new system, the second rollout will be budgeting specifically for vacancy savings at the position level, which it's not typically done that way in a lot of places, but after doing this for so many years in the district, that is the best approach to this.
So what does that mean? So there's a 5% vacancy rate in the budget. Does that mean that my salary in diffs has just gone from 100,000 to
No.
95,000?
No, your salary rate will not change. What that means is when we go in and we work with the agency to determine the vacancy savings rate, instead of us saying the vacancy savings rate is 8% and looking at all the positions and saying we need to hold whatever positions we can, in order to meet this vacancy savings rate, we will already know which positions were affected by that proposed vacancy savings rate. Does that?
That sounds crazy to me.
Well, that's
So-
what happens is when you ask the question in April, when you say, I want to take an additional 2% vacancy savings, and you'll say, and we say, well, we can't do that because while there's a budget here, but we need to meet that vacancy savings rate in order to stay balanced. What you typically hear us say to you is, you'll say, well, which positions? And we'll say, well, it's at the agency level, not at the position level.
Well, yeah, but so there's an agency that has $100 million payroll.
Mhm.
What would that be? 1,000 employees, roughly? 1,000 employees? Now, typically, they have, what's 5% of 1,000? 500? What's 5% of 1,000? No, it's not 500. 50? Yes, 5% of 1,000. 50?
50.
Okay. Typically, they have 50 vacancies.
Mhm.
Typically. 1,000 people. Somebody got hired yesterday, somebody put in their resignation for next week,
Mhm.
and typically they have 50 vacant positions.
Mhm.
Okay, so we budget a 5% vacancy rate.
Mhm.
There are 1,000 people,
Mhm.
right? That's what we agreed, $100 million payroll, 1,000 employees, 5% vacancy. Those are our assumptions here.
Mhm.
Are you then identifying 50 positions that presumably right now are vacant and say, well, they're just going to be kept vacant?
Well, it's not just about vacant positions. It's also about when the position is hired. So for example, you may have a position, not all positions start, if you have a vacant position in FY 2025 and you're looking to build a FY 2026 budget, you may have a position that you're going to say, well, I'm not going to hire this position until February of 2026. I'm not going to hire this position until July of 2026. So you have every intention of hiring for that position. It's just the starting date has moved, which gives you savings throughout the rest of the
I
year.
understand what you're
Yeah.
saying, but in terms of the
It doesn't mean you hold them to that because the budget is very elastic. Things changed during the execution period, and you may find that that savings is someplace else. You may find through attrition. So, you build this budget 18 months in advance or something.
yeah, but
to
I'm
that
getting
extent.
at what you just said, and I'm actually, for purposes of this hearing on the reprogramming, I think I'm getting a field here, but if I'm understanding you correctly, that's kind of crazy.
No, we're not,
At any given time, this agency has 50 vacancies,
okay?
but the 50 vacancies are constantly changing,
That's right.
constantly changing.
That's right.
So you can't assign
That's
a
through
vacancy
formulation.
saving to
That's-
any specific position.
But that's during formulation. And so once you execute the budget, things change. Throughout the year,
So how,
things change.
we,
That's just for planning purposes. But once you execute the budget, you may have a higher attrition rate than you thought, which means that position that you originally thought you weren't going to hire until February, now you can hire it in October because you have savings elsewhere in the PS budget or someplace else. That's just for planning purposes. That's just for budgeting
but-
purposes.
I went down this line and you started to speak because, and I'm about to sneeze.
I didn't mean to get you worked up. I mean, I'm more than willing to talk to you about it outside the hearing because it hasn't happened yet. We're not there yet. I was trying to answer the
Okay,
question.
so, but let's talk about what's going on right now.
That's
So
right.
at the beginning of the year,
Mhm,
meaning 2 weeks ago,
mhm.
what did you do with regard to an agency and their personnel budget and the vacancy savings?
What
Did you
did-
pull that money out?
What did? So
Yeah, what did you do?
during
How-
formulation,
No, I'm talking about 2 weeks ago. October 1st, October 2nd.
no, whatever was baked into the budget is in the budget. So if the vacancy savings is already baked into the budget, then you simply have to implement your budget. However you implement that budget, depending, because the savings may change where you expect the savings, but that's already baked into the
Well,
budget. So you don't pull it out again.
Miss Reed has got some vacancies over at St. Elizabeth's Hospital.
Yes.
I don't know how many, that doesn't matter. Can she hire them all today?
If she has the money to hire them,
I
Depends.
didn't like that answer.
if she has the funding,
Well, she does have the budget, but there's vacancy savings. Did that get taken out so that she
the
has less?
vacancy savings is still there, but there's so many things happening to the budget. Maybe not the first week of the budget, but as the budget period progresses, there are so many things that you said you were going to spend money on that you don't spend money. There are some things that you, and so
Asking what your office does. So she has access to all the money she needs
that's right.
as budgeted for the vacant position.
That's correct. That's
And
correct.
that's true with every agency,
That's true with every agency.
including
On
department,
October 1st.
and on October 2nd, including department.
As the year progresses, it changes. On October 1st, when you implement that budget, you have everything, unless something happened prior to you implementing the budget, which often does, something changes. You maybe, if you're dealing with the population, for example, and I don't want to get too much into the programmatic aspect of it, but let's say you anticipated that you were going to meeting a population of 1,000. Now you're meeting a population of 2,000. So that obviously is going to change the way that you implement the budget. But on October 1st, assuming nothing changes, which never happens, assuming nothing changes before you get to October 1st, you have the budget that you plan to spend and you can spend it as you initially planned.
So Miss Reed has got all the money she needs to hire at St. Elizabeth's today, but it may be in a couple months she won't.
Maybe in a couple of weeks it won't. I don't know. It just depends on what happens during the course of the implementation of that budget.
Chairman, if I could just add, this is what I was trying to describe earlier in us trying to work with agencies to find out what is the ideal staffing ratios, right? Filled positions, what's the ideal amount of overtime? Because there will always be overtime, right? But how can we maximize the staffing OT ratio? And then what is the path to get there, right? We're not going to fill, and a good example of this is Department of Corrections. Many years ago, when we first, well, back in like 2016, 2017,
The 60 FTEs?
yeah, the
Okay.
FTEs, we started working with corrections because they had significant overtime spending to begin adding more and more positions. And we were able to fill those positions and bring down the overtime expenses so they no longer ran into these big end of year pressures. Now that's unfortunately all changed after COVID, and we're back at being in a challenging place with hard to fill positions, but it is possible and it will take some time. That being said, you know, if agencies get additional vacancies or additional vacancy savings added to their budget without a corresponding increase in overtime, it is going to make it harder for them to hire because they're going to incur those overtime costs.
I should have asked this earlier. Who approves the overtime? Is it the agency director or is it the city administrator?
So right now, so under the existing mayor's order, overtime was frozen and agencies could submit waivers to get overtime approved. That practice will continue in FY '26.
So DDOT sought a waiver for its overtime increase.
Yes, after the mayor's order was implemented. Right, so that happened in March.
And DBH
Mhm.
asked the city administrator for a waiver for overtime.
Correct. So, but at the agency level, right, each agency has their own set of controls. Like we're approving the budget for overtime, each agency has their own set of controls for approving who gets overtime, and how much.
Sure. But aren't there some agencies that year after year after year are overspending their budget, and year after year after year, there are other agencies that are underspending their budget?
At a global level or related to overtime?
At a global level?
Yes, every year some agencies incur
No, I didn't say
additional
some
costs.
every year. I said that some agencies year after year. There are annual overspenders, and there's some agencies that are annual underspenders.
Yes,
And wouldn't that correlate possibly with how much fiscal discipline there is within the agency?
I think that it doesn't correspond to how much fiscal discipline is within the agency. So let's take overtime, for example. Overtime has significantly increased at a number of our agencies for all the reasons that we've talked about. It's also getting more expensive as different collective bargaining agreements take effect and pay raises take effect. There is a need to add additional funds in some cases to overtime in order for agencies to have the necessary resources. And in the upcoming FY '27 budget, we've already talked and agreed with the CFO that MPD, DOC, and Fire and EMS will have full overtime funding on a recurring basis.
Okay, so that was a nice answer with regard to overtime, but my question was about the agencies. There are some that, if I could use this term, in terms of overspending, underspending, there's some agencies that are routine violators, and there are others that are routine compliance. Correct?
I don't,
If I did a list of reprogrammings for the last 10 years, wouldn't I find that some agencies, if I said the last 10 years, there are a couple agencies that are needing reprogramming additional funding 10 years, and there are others that 0 years.
there are some agencies that almost every year require some additional reprogramming. There are some that don't. It is not attributed, however, to their fiscal discipline.
Well, then what is it
There are,
attributed to?
well, give me an agency and we can talk more about it. But it's not like agencies are not making sure that they're being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. The challenge is that we build these budgets, as Mr. Candidate indicated, about a year in advance. We do our best to project and predict what is going to be needed. By the time the fiscal year begins, it's almost a year later, and a lot of things can change. They can change during the year, they can change at the start of the year, and there are things that are outside of our control. Now, it's our job to be responsive to those needs and how they change. And that is why we have the ability to reprogram. That is why we submit a supplemental budget to you every year. We have to be responsive. So I do understand that there are some agencies that do need end-of-year reprogrammings consistently, but it's not that they're not trying to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. There are systemic issues that we are trying to correct.
So let me take DGS, 18.4 million. For higher than expected costs for electricity, natural gas, water, steam, rent costs, as well as higher personnel services costs due to overtime. In addition, there was an increase in security expenditures because of critical needs across the district. The energy pressure was driven almost entirely by higher than expected energy rates. Since summer 2021, rates have continually increased in response to market conditions. The demand on natural gas has increased costs, which impacts electricity rates since the PEPCO grid relies heavily on natural gas for electricity production.
Okay. Okay.
I'm sorry, Chairman. What was your question?
Explain DGS.
Sure.
18.4, they're number 3 on the list in terms of amount.
Sure. I apologize. I was just double checking that Mr. Candidate could provide the specific breakouts for the amounts. So there's 4 main drivers for the spending pressures in DGS, as you alluded to. The first is around security. So we did have both an increase in the costs of security personnel. As you know, this is a contracted service, although we have started the pilot this year. Thank you, Council, for approving that pilot to try to in-house some security guards and see if we can achieve some cost savings. But this is a contracted service, and the market rates continue to go up every single year. In addition, we had a number of agencies that experienced issues at their facilities related to public safety, and that led to increased demand for a variety of public safety interventions. Also, when we add new portfolio, new property, right, new posts, those can increase costs. We do expect in FY26, this will not be an issue. When we spoke with DGS just the other week and had a discussion with them, sort of reviewing what happened in FY25, trying to look at what might happen in 26, how can we take steps to address it? It does seem like we are in a good spot budget-wise for security for FY26. DGS has also implemented a tool that will make sure that if additional requests come to them for service, which could happen, there's a discussion at the city administrator's office to make sure that that's something that we can agree to.
So how much is this? Of the 18.4 million, how much is security?
Roughly 7.6.
So the second major driver and component of DGS is energy. This is going to continue to be a challenge for us for the foreseeable future. This is another area where I do think there needs to be a lot of discussion on how we can best limit the cost growth in this area. And it's really, really hard because, as you know, as everyone knows, energy prices are going up significantly. And they're not going up for anything that we're doing. They're going up for a variety of reasons. And at the same time, while we continue to expand our government footprint, right, we're going to increase the amount of energy that we're using. So there are strategies that we need to employ to think about how we can, reduce utilization, and is there a way to also bring costs down? That will be very, very difficult. This will be a long-term issue. We do believe that energy is funded in FY '26 as of right now, but I'll tell you that I can't predict when rates are going to rise again. So it's very possible that this is something you'll see in the supplemental budget when we submit it in the spring.
So how much is this?
The energy for 26?
25.
No.
Oh, 25. Energy, I'm sorry. So
For the
energy,
programming.
I got you. Energy roughly 2.1. Oh, I'm sorry. Energy consultant, electricity roughly. So I have it combined. I actually have electricity, and I have that at 5.5 million.
Is it only electricity?
Electricity, I have
Mhm.
electricity, natural gas at 2.1, water 1.5. Yeah, and then there's a small amount, 200,000, that's in here outside of security, but that's the lion's share, 7.6 roughly for security, 2.1 for natural gas, 5.5 for electricity, 1.5 for water. And this is the breakdown at the time that the spending pressure was being resolved via the reprogramming. Since then, the numbers may have changed a little bit, but I don't have that breakdown. But this is what it was at the time that we had to resolve the spending pressure.
So I have 9.1 million for energy.
Okay. And there's
So-
another 200,000 that falls in there. I just don't have the category. So in total, if you do, it's 10.8. Everything outside of the security is 10.8 million.
And we did add some funding in the supplemental for DGS for electricity costs. Unfortunately, it just ended up being higher than we anticipated at that time.
So I have 7.6 million for security,
Mm-hmm.
9.1 million for energy. That's 5.5 plus 2.1 plus 1.5.
So let me just walk through it again.
And that gets me 16.7. And then you said 1.7 for other.
So I'll walk through it again. 2.1 for natural gas, 5.5 for electricity. I have a number in here I shouldn't have. Sorry. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, yeah. One quick adjustment. Okay. So 2.1 for natural, 2.1 for natural gas, 5.5 for electricity, 1.5 for water. I have 200,000. Oops. Okay. And so, yep, okay, so that's 9.3. And then the
200,000 you didn't identify as being energy,
it's I don't have the detail on the 200,000.
but it is energy.
It should be energy. I just don't have the commodity. And so,
Right, that's 9.3.
so it's 9.1 actually it's 9.1. Yep, 9.1 for security. I'm sorry. I have the numbers here. I don't have them totaled out, so I was doing it as we were talking. So it's 9.1 for security. Yeah, there's rent in there. There's rent in here too, but I don't have all of that broken out. So rent's in here as well, but I don't have I can give you the actual breakdown. These are my notes from when we did the spending pressure list, but I don't have it. I may have left something out, but that gets you to the 18.4, but I may have defined one of the commodities. The commodities that I gave you, no problem, and the 9.1 million, which I'm calling security, there's something in there probably for rent, but I just don't have that rent number against this. So all I have is the net of the 9.3, which is for energy, and then the rest is 9.1. The lion's share of that is for security and rent.
But you don't know how much.
I don't have the breakout for that.
We'll get you the exact breakout, Chairman.
So, why would there be 1.5 million needed for water? Those rates aren't changing. That's pretty predictable. You have an estimator over DGS, don't you?
We do have an estimator. I would say based on the total volume that DGS is collecting and billing for all of those different commodities, that's a pretty small number.
Well, if the water, so I'm just going to go down this road. If water, the rates have not changed. I don't think the rates have changed since the CREAC fee, which was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So water is predictable. And if the water is underestimated by 1.5 million, that concerns me that electric and gas are underestimated. And for sure, you need 5.5 million more for electric and you need 2.1 more for gas. I realize those prices are more volatile, but the issue here is accurate budgeting, accurate forecasting, and it doesn't sound to me like it was accurate with regard to the water, which makes me think it wasn't accurate with regard to the other utilities.
I don't think that's the case. I do think that in DGS, this is, if we back up all the way to the beginning of the fiscal year, there were some issues where there was about 5 million of energy savings that was attributed, I believe it was to DDOT's budget when it should have been attributed to DGS's budget. As a result, DGS had to move around some monies within their fixed costs in order to be able to offset some of those bills. What you're seeing, I think, in the like the water, the steam, the natural gas, is them really just putting back monies that were needed at the beginning of the fiscal year because of this money being attributed to DDOT's budget when it should have been attributed to DGS's budget. That's been corrected, but in the beginning of the fiscal year, there's not a lot of resources to move around, so we typically ask agencies to look within their own budgets to address those issues.
Not sure I'm following. So if the money was incorrectly attributed to DDOT, I'm not quite sure how that happens because presumably the budget reflects what everybody needs and then it goes through a public hearing. But if the money was incorrectly given to DDOT, why isn't it just reprogrammed from DDOT to DGS at the beginning of the year?
So that was so I think this would be a good one to follow up on. I do think that there was some confusion around the energy budgets, particularly as it relates to the changes within the SCTF. The issue has been addressed, but it did cause some execution issues in the beginning of the fiscal year.
All right, so you'll get back to me on energy.
Yes.
Let me clarify that 200,000, that's for steam. And I'm getting you the breakdown for I should have it in a few minutes, the breakdown of rent and security. But the 200,000 is for steam
At
in
the
DGS.
jail?
I don't know.
That was a
I'm
serious
sorry. I
question.
know it's a serious question, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. I would have to defer.
We can find out from the program. That wouldn't make sense, but we'll find out and confirm.
So you'll get back to me to explain energy, including why it wasn't reprogrammed at the beginning of the year if it was budgeted in the wrong agency.
Correct.
So why would there be, so I've already asked why we're off on the estimating of these utility costs. Some of it I get, rates change. We all were shocked when we saw the electric rates go up in June. Although doesn't the district have negotiated contracts for energy? We're a big enough purchaser, why wouldn't we have negotiated contracts?
So the district does negotiate purchase prices. That being said, I will have to follow up with how often those are adjusted based on what is changing in terms of the pricing.
Do you have an analysis of utilization? Meaning how many
Yes.
therms and BTUs and so forth?
Yep.
And what's that looking like?
So I think, and we discussed this a little bit during this year's budget oversight hearing and last year's budget oversight hearing, and we can follow up with more detail. When you look at utilization across the board, it hasn't changed all that significantly. And what you have seen are the cost of the electricity has gone up substantially. And that's driven by a couple different factors. Some of it is around policy choices that we make in regards to renewable purchasing and how much of a portion of our energy that needs to be. Some of it is driven by what the grid comes and supports, and the demand on the grid, as we all know, has gotten significantly higher with particularly the developments of data centers. And that cost is being passed along to all of us who use that grid.
Okay, but you're going to get back with a fuller explanation.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I do think there is a much larger conversation we need to have, similar to overtime around energy. It is very complicated. The federal government has changed a lot of what they support when it comes to energy. There used to be a lot more grant programs, tax incentives, things that would support the development of different energy sources. And it is a significant cost that is only going to keep growing. And there are some things that we can do to smooth that out.
So why would rent be an issue? Why is that on Mr. Kennedy's list? Don't we know what we're renting?
I actually have a breakdown now. I got to reverse it. It's 1.3 for security, 7.8 for rent.
What?
And
1.3 for,
but there was an internal reprogramming that addressed part of this issue, and that's why, so it's 1.3 million for security, 7.8 million for rent, but part of that was offset by an internal reprogramming of 1.1 million, where they moved money to address this rent and security issue.
why is rent so far off?
So I can answer that. So in the development of the budget, we, and you probably saw this last year, it was also in the budget that we submitted for FY26. DGS has been working as leases are set to expire on renegotiations. Typically, we can accrue some 1, 2, 3-year savings when they do that renegotiation. In this particular case, the lease negotiation took longer than anticipated and did not materialize in the same amount of savings because it was discovered that some of the funds that the agencies use so that the intra-district to DGS were non-local sources. And so this was something that we needed to fix in the end of year reprogramming. It's not something that you should see recurring in 26 and beyond.
So agencies intra-district to DGS to pay for their rent.
Some do.
And some of the agencies thought that they had money that they didn't have.
The money that they had was not local, it was non-local. And so we couldn't, since the savings was taken in local, we had to go back and correct it.
And that's what this is.
That's correct. And also the
But
lease.
how does that happen?
It shouldn't have happened. And once we discovered that it had happened. We knew we had to fix it. I don't think that it is obviously something that now that we have seen this happen, we are taking steps to make sure it does not happen in the future. And also, I think a lot of the leases, the district has already come up on its renegotiation. I don't think this is like a strategy that we're going to be able to keep using year after year. But again, this is an issue, should be solved in 25. You should not see it recur in 26 and beyond. I should also add that the security costs, as I mentioned, we expect to be addressed with the 26 budget, so we don't expect a pressure there. Rent, energy is the one that, you know, is the wild card. And then for overtime, very similar to what we discussed with DBH and DDOT. DGS is another agency that does need overtime and has had to rely on more overtime while also meeting a vacancy savings rate.
Mr. Chairman, let me, if I could, STEAM is at the MLK Library, the Daily Building, and the shelter at 425 Second Street Northwest.
Which is closed.
Yeah, that's where we have STEAM listed.
Interesting. Let me go to settlements and judgments. So what it says here is 4.5 million in higher than anticipated costs due to settlements and judgments. Really?
Really, as in,
Higher than anticipated?
so the settlements and judgments budget, if you recall during COVID, as courts, you know, stopped operating for a little while, there's a big backlog. We saw a big drop in settlements and judgments. As the courts started to reopen, we began to see an increase in utilization of settlements and judgments fund. In this fiscal year, there were several large settlements that occurred that created a spending pressure in the fund pretty quickly in the beginning of the fiscal year. And the spending pressure was almost anticipated to be as much as what was in the fund itself. Now, how those settlement amounts get determined, that is a question for the Office of the Attorney General. That is not something I can answer here. What I can say is that we know that this is likely to be an issue going forward. That is why we did introduce the tort reform BSA subtitle as a way to, you know, really put ourselves in line with our surrounding jurisdictions and avoid this type of issue. Council chose to remove that. And so we have addressed the pressures for FY25. I do not know if it's going to have a pressure in FY26 or 27. We do not get like a forecast, like a running list of settlements that are coming our way. So this is one that, you know, unfortunately could continue to be an
Well,
issue.
what are we doing to address the liability? So capping the judgments should not have been a surprise to the mayor that would be politically very unpopular. This is not a jurisdiction that has ever supported tort reform, so-called tort reform. So rather than that approach, what about reducing the liabilities? That is, the incidents that lead to these settlements and judgments. What's being done there?
So I think that, you know, obviously that is something that the Office of Risk Management focuses heavily on. If that's a discussion that you want to have, that's a little bit outside the scope of the reprogramming. So I would ask that we have a follow-up meeting with the Office of Risk Management and the Office of the Attorney General.
Mr. Chairman, the DBH, earlier you asked a question about the number of vacant positions. In DBH, as of 9/30, it was 160 locally funded vacant positions as of September 30th.
So my impression is that there are several places in the budget where somebody, I'm not sure who the somebody is, maybe your office, goes to pay for a settlement or judgment. There's the Settlements and Judgments Fund.
Section 801,
Okay.
Chairman, do you mean if it's not covered by like contingency cash or reprogramming, how those get paid?
I'll take all the above.
okay, so yes, actually, in the event that there is a settlement that the agency's ZH0 budget, settlement and judgment cannot cover because they've overspent, the district has a, we have these agencies that carry, or this section 803, there's legislation,
803 or 801?
it's, I'm sorry, 801, 801. It used to be 103, now it's 801. Thank you for correcting me. And it carries its own appropriation authority, but that appropriation authority, meaning if you have a cost that exceeds what you have in agency settlement and judgment, to prevent you from incurring fees and late fees and penalties, because it's a settlement and judgment, and again, it exceeds the appropriation and settlement and judgment agency. We can, under the law, we can charge it to these agencies under section 801 and give it budget authority. But then that means that it is an unbudgeted expense that has to be addressed year in because it is not backed by any identifiable resources. And I actually met with your budget office earlier today, and we made a lot of progress, and we're going to follow up and just to walk them through the mechanics of it.
The mechanics of,
It's section 801 and how it works.
so there are two sources for settlements and judgments, the Settlements and Judgments Fund and Section 801. And Section 801 doesn't actually have money in it.
That's correct.
Did the budget office ask you for a history of expenditures, annual expenditures pursuant to 801?
They actually pulled it themselves. So you can go into diffs or back in SOAR and see it. We're going to continue our discussions around it. So we're in early discussions about it, but they actually wanted to understand where the mechanics of it and where they should be pulling it out of diffs, but they were able to pull some of the data out of diffs and probably went as far back as SOAR.
Well, that's not going back very far.
SOAR? Well,
Going back
depending on how far you go,
was around like 3 years ago.
but 3 years and before.
You mean the beginning of SOAR?
Well, maybe not the beginning of SOAR, but somewhere in there.
I'm just trying to understand what
Somewhere in there.
SOAR means.
So let's just say they did a good job of pulling data related to section when it went as far back as section 103. They did a good job of pulling expenditure data so that they could ask questions about it.
Okay, so I asked a question, Ms. Reed, about what we're doing to control liability, and your answer was talk to ORM and OAG.
Yes. I think that's a good discussion to have. I think that it is one side of the solution. I still do believe that in order to not experience significant pressures in this area year after year, we do need to look at limitations on liability. So we could discuss both options and how they would help us manage the budgets going forward.
I'm going to turn to Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. Thank you very much for your testimonies. It's not a big thing, but DHS, it's 1.5 million in spending pressure. As much as anything, I wanted to come to show I'm watching. We're going to try to be very vigilant around these issues going forward. And DHS is an agency which has faced significant spending pressures over the years. And it's not necessarily the fault of the agency, it's the circumstances that they deal with. But we want to try to provide proper oversight and understand it as it's happening. On the 1.5 million, and it's for low barrier shelters, when we go back and we look at the FRPs for the different quarters, there's a lot of volatility. So it looked like, I think, in the first quarter, the spending pressure was 8.6 million reported. Then in Q2, it was 32.2 million. Then Q3, you appear to have solved it. Maybe that's something that you did in the supplemental. Then Q4, here we are, 1.5 million. So you tried to solve it, almost solved it. A lot happened in Q4, but also one thing that happened was you used contingency funds for the expansion of low barrier capacity. So that raises a question. So walk me through what happened in this space, if you can, for funding for low barrier shelters. What caused the pressures in the fall and winter, how you solved it in the spring, and why your fix in the spring was 1.5 million short of being adequate.
Sure. So, the main driver of the spending pressure in DHS in FY25 was really related to rapid rehousing, right? And it was related to the backlog and the number of people being exited and our ability to exit them. So when we submitted the supplemental budget, that addressed about $47.3 million. That was largely attributed to FRSP. Then there was also $1 million for the summer EBT program. Sunbucks is the more familiar name of it. So DHS was able to cover some of the other costs within their budget by using sort of savings that were occurring in other areas, right? So when we submitted the budget with the supplemental, we thought we had solved everything. Unfortunately, we did not, and DHS at this point, their budget has gotten extremely tight. So there's not a lot of like cushion that they can pull from. Then we did also expand our low barrier shelter options over the summer and into the fall. And so that created some additional pressure. We knew that might have an increased cost to DHS. They were going to do their best to manage internally, but we knew that might materialize. And so it's really being driven by the decision to expand our low barrier shelter offerings beyond what we normally do outside of hypothermia season.
But part of that expansion, my understanding was you were using contingency funds, but there weren't quite enough contingency funds in order to pay for that expansion in low barrier shelters?
That's correct. My understanding is that we expanded the use, and that if the agency were to need contingency cash in order to be able to pay bills, that would happen, or we could address it in a year-end reprogramming.
Okay. And then, I mean, part of your answer goes to a concern I have, actually, because what happened in the spring, it's not that you put new dollars in the supplemental budget, it's that DHS was able to move money from where there'd been underspending to where there was overspending. And tracking both sides of that coin, I think, are important for us, because if there are places where there may be systematic underspending, then we want to know about that. Do you happen to recall where they moved the money from in the third quarter that they found $32 million, it looks like, in order to solve the issue in the third quarter? Do you recall where that came from?
I will follow up. My general recollection is that it most likely came from PSH or TAH vouchers, because they're budgeted to be, basically utilized beginning October 1. They don't all lease up, right, on October 1. And so there is some savings. Several years ago when council put the big infusion of vouchers, we saw significant underspending year after year because they just could not lease up that fast. It is now, I think we have better sort of, for 26, I think we're in a better spot where we're not going to see that. That's the bulk of it, but that was a long time ago. So if you wouldn't mind, I can follow up with you with some more details. I would just have to go back and look at what were we seeing in March when we were finalizing what would go in the supplemental.
Okay, I mean, that's great. It raises a question for me whether there's something structural here that when we put money in for vouchers, and say we put money in for 100 vouchers for a year, and you'd have to put them in for the full financial plan. But in the first year of those vouchers, if the assumption is that it's for the whole year, that's never going to be true.
Correct. And we have prorated it in the past. But it becomes very difficult when when the council budgets for vouchers, we budget based on an average cost, right? Because that's the way to do it. When you actually get to implementing and leasing up, the cost can change depending on the composition of the family and what units that they choose to live in. So it's a very difficult thing to prorate and calculate explicitly to that number.
No, I hear you, but what we know is having the same amount of money in year one as you have in years 2, 3, and 4 is going to mean there's going to be extra money in year one. And you almost could say, okay, well, assume if they were all leased up in the course of the year, you use 6 months as the likely average. You're going to have that noise in the cost regardless. Okay, very helpful. The fact that this was solved by taking money from another pot and plugging the hole raises concerns for me about FY26, because what it means is whatever it is that we budgeted in FY25 was 30 plus million shy of what it needed to be for low barrier shelters. And our low barrier shelter landscape is different and more challenging in the wake of the federal surge. So to what extent have we built in, I mean, we couldn't have built in for the federal surge in the budget that we just recently passed, but to what extent have we built in to this budget the challenges we faced in FY25 that required moving $30 million from one place to another?
So the good news is, and we just met with DHS the other week to talk about what should we expect in 26. I don't see the continuum of care, including the low barrier shelters, being a spending pressure. So what we did try to do, because to your point, for many years, the DHS budget was overfunded in some areas, underfunded in other areas, and we kept working to move the pieces around. That has largely, I believe, settled now. And so we do not anticipate a pressure in continuum of care. Now, we could see a huge demand or surge or something like that could impact that. But based on what we know today, the area that we are closely watching is lease-ups for permanent supportive housing, right? And just watching the pace of lease-ups for PSH and making sure that we don't over exceed what's been allocated, right? Because for many years, they had so much underspending. Now we're really catching up. Now we may hit a point where because it's been so many years that they've been catching up, the money put in to fund a voucher 3 years ago is not the same money that would be needed today. So that's what we're watching and we have to work on. That's the only area for right now that we're having discussions with them about.
Okay, that's really useful. I'm really glad I came. I do think we're watching the pace of lease-ups also and watching the number of vouchers that we have and wondering, is there going to be a point where we run out of vouchers, where we've leased everyone up and we've run out of vouchers. And part of what I'm hearing you say is, let's say I am thinking there are 800 vouchers out there to be leased up. And there was a time when we were leasing 50 a month. And so that would take 16 months. We're not going to run out. We're now leasing 100 a month. So 8 months, we are going to run out before the end of the fiscal year. But what I'm hearing you tell me is there is another pressure, which is that calculation of how many vouchers we have is a calculation of how much money we have and what it usually means in terms of a lease up. And that that number might not be as high as 800. Do you have an idea?
No, but I can follow up. I mean, it's not going to be, huge orders of magnitude, but I do think it's important that we have to be careful not to, we can approximate how many vouchers a certain amount of funding will be able to support. And then we need to revisit that once we're actually implementing it and we see what are the different makeups of people that are requesting the use of the vouchers. So it's not going to be like huge orders of magnitude difference, but especially when, some of these, it's taken several years to get caught up because of the volume. We know that rents get more expensive. And so that same dollar put in doesn't go as far today.
All right, I hear I will wind up actually more with a little bit of an advertisement. I mean, one of the issues that I press on in other settings is the rent reasonableness measure. And so rent reasonableness is totally relevant to this because what we're paying, if we were paying less, then the dollars would go farther. And we really are getting to a place where the dollars are running out. So we need to be very scrupulous about what we're paying. We need to pay fairly, reasonable, but we can't overpay. And so I'll use this as a plea for you to be supportive of my legislation on rent stabilization in the voucher context, that reasonable rent in a rent stabilized building for a voucher tenant should be the rent stabilized rent, not the market rent. Food for thought.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
A few more questions. DPW.
Oh, sorry.
$6.6 million in higher than anticipated overtime costs. And it's not clear to me, is that overtime costs for trash collections, towing operations, and snow removal, or is that 4 different things? Overtime, trash, towing, and snow?
No, it's all related to overtime and it's all related to those sort of main service lines that DPW provides. This is another area where we need to be taking a look at what is the appropriate staffing level, right? For like how many filled positions do we need to make sure to strive for? What's the appropriate amount of overtime? I will say, the mayor did request and the council approved, thank you very much, a new swing shift for DPW that will begin in FY26. And so that swing shift is meant to help address some of the overtime costs so that we have a crew that's basically dedicated to addressing emergencies or addressing things that pop up that are unplanned throughout the fiscal year instead of having to rely on overtime. So we do think that this will help bring down the costs. We'll see how this first swing shift works, as we're considering formulation for FY27. It may be that we need to add another swing shift. Also, it will depend too on the amount of snow that we get in any given year. If you look at DPW's overtime, it also depends on how much snow events we
Yeah,
have.
but we budget for snow, and snow is always going to be overtime because we don't have positions full-time for snow removal, even though I wish we had more snow. We had 2 light snows last year. So why would snow removal be an issue?
So even though we have, let me go back and get what the deployments were for the snow events. I know both DGS and DPW needed increased funds, and we put funds for DGS in the supplemental as well as some money in DPW for snow. So even though sometimes the events turn out to be light, they're forecasted to be much heavier, the deployment ends up being bigger. All I'm saying is, when it comes to DPW, we can plan for routine overtime, right? The things that we know typically will happen year after year that require overtime, but there are always going to be unplanned events that are going to change the cost.
I get that there are going to be unplanned events, but again, we budget for snow, correct?
We do budget for snow.
Okay, we had two light events, as I
Mhm.
recall, less than 4 inches in December and less than 4 inches in January, two. There were a couple other scares,
Mhm.
maybe the wrong word, but there wasn't snow. So I'm not getting why the snow budget wouldn't have been enough.
So my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the snow budget is related to, not to overtime. The snow budget is related to contractual services and salt. And so, and salt, lots of salt. So but the overtime budget for the agency, as I mentioned, and for several other agencies, there is kind of a rebalancing that we need to look at based on what is realistic in terms of staffing, and what is the appropriate amount of overtime and how do
So
we
if you're
build
getting a
towards that?
weird expression on my face, it's because you guys have been around for a while, DPW has been around for a while. There's nothing new here.
I disagree that there's nothing new.
What's new?
I think that DPW has taken on additional work.
Like snow?
No, not snow,
Like
related
trash
to
removal?
trash removal.
Like what?
So if you recall, there's been efforts to beautify the city. And that has taken the work of DPW to make that happen.
To the tune of 6 million?
Not to the tune of 6 million. That is the amount of overtime the agency incurred. If you look at years past, DPW is an agency that has had overtime costs every year. And we are working to figure out how we can figure out what the appropriate amount of overtime is and get to a place where we're not seeing so many cost overruns.
Okay, so
Part of that-
my takeaway here is, assuming we budgeted adequately, we should have included within the overtime budget, the overtime costs for snow removal. And the only spending pressure at DPW is overtime. So snow shouldn't have been an issue, but it's on the list. And I don't see the trash is different. I don't see that anything's different, but you did say we've taken on some additional beautification efforts.
That's correct. And the council also approved, if you recall, we kept on 80 additional part-time employees at
But
DPW.
we budgeted for that.
Yes,
And that's FY 26.
6. Yes.
Okay,
So,
but we're talking about FY 25. That's what's
Mhm.
before us.
yep, that is correct. So we did put some money in the supplemental for DPW. We put in 5.8 million in the supplemental to help bring down the cost of overtime as well as pay for those additional 80 folks for half the fiscal year. And then we unfortunately still saw overtime pressures in DPW.
So why isn't my takeaway here a policy decision to do more beautification? Well, that costs money.
Mhm.
And B, a lack of discipline.
I do not agree with the lack of discipline. There was an effort, there was a decision related to beautification. Absolutely. We did put money in the 25 budget for that. We also put money in the 26 budget, which the council approved to continue that effort.
Okay, but the issue here is overspending.
So I think, Chairman, what I would like to say again is that when it comes to overtime, it is a complicated process and it's one that's going to take a little bit of time to address. There are many levers that need to be pulled in order for us to be more successful with overtime, and that includes some policy changes. So we do need to have a serious discussion about how we're able to do this together, because we also submit budgets to council. Council will take positions from these agencies. Council will not increase the overtime budget, which makes the agencies stop hiring further in the fiscal year and puts more pressure on the overtime budget. It's a really difficult spiral to get out of. And that's why we have been working with the agencies to find out what is that appropriate amount of overtime? What does that mean for your staffing? So, and how will we get there so we can show that, right? But we have
Okay, but
to,
we did we cut the overtime budget for DPW when we adopted the FY '25 budget?
no, the council takes positions without adjusting the overtime budget.
Well, we took positions, I hate to look at Mr. Kennedy, but we took positions that were certified as we could take without affecting the agency's operations. I mean, not every position is necessary, and not every position or FTE affects overtime.
That is true, but there are many positions that do affect overtime.
Okay, did we take those positions
There have been those positions taken in the past. Yes.
in FY '25?
Yes. Yes.
Maybe you could follow up, and you're not getting a lot of homework here. I have so far 3 things you're following up on, but this will
That's
be
fine.
one. How council actions affected DPW overtime in '25.
Sure. I was thinking of DGS.
Okay, but we're talking about DPW.
Okay. But
I don't want to hear about DGS.
DPW, like I said, and like I said for the other agencies, the overtime problems are gonna take,
You made that point,
thank you.
and I have down here 3 buckets: staff shortages, increased demand, and leave usage.
Mhm.
And one of your homework assignments, unfortunately mine as well, is that we're both going to ask Councilmember Bonds to have a hearing soon on the bill that apparently I introduced, which was the mayor's proposed subtitle, which was too complicated and too controversial to be in the Budget Support Act. But that doesn't mean that there isn't something there that needs to be adopted.
Thank you.
So why can't agencies absorb these costs? Why can't DPW pick up 6.6 million? What's its total budget?
Give me a moment. So while I'm looking that up, DPW is a very lean agency. They're not an agency that has lots of money sloshing around that they can just pull, right? They're people, they're mostly people and equipment. And so if you're going to take that amount of money, you're either going to end up reducing a line of service or you're going to end up laying off a bunch of people. Mhm. You have it? Okay. $176.3 million.
176, I thought you were going to say like 86.
That's 26.
That's for 26.
$176 million. So 6 million is like 3%. And they couldn't absorb that. I mean, I think that question should be asked about every agency, every reprogramming, every spending pressure.
Sure. I mean, that is a question we ask the agencies, of course, when we are thinking about costs that we may need to add. One of our first questions is, what can you do differently to absorb it? The answer we sometimes get is not something that any of us would want to have happen. In the case of DPW, it would be not doing whole lines of service or reducing the amount of service that's provided or laying people off. Those are not decisions that we support.
Well, if you asked me where the council could cut its budget, the first thing I would say was I would have to stop any reprogrammings. But then you probably would say that's not acceptable. And actually, there are other choices we could make. And I'm sounding a little glib here, but sometimes agencies come up with worst case because they don't really want to try very hard. But I won't go down that route too much. Is this the only reprogramming we're going to get?
For year end?
Yeah.
No.
What else?
There's another one that is I believe is currently filed with council right now.
For how much?
It's about 18.9 million.
Is that it?
Right now, that's it. We're doing, because we don't have much more time if we're going to submit anything else.
Yeah, I know, but the one that we have before us actually was processed. The memo I've been reading from was written by you September 19th, a month ago. So, and you have to do all the reprogrammings in October, I think, for year end.
Yes.
You should know everything that's in the queue.
Yep. So it's final. Okay. So the reprogramming, the $18.9 million reprogramming that's currently filed with council, funds 4 different agencies: MPD, Settlements and Judgments, DHS, and Department of Disability Services.
And what's after that?
That should be the very last one. There's one conversation that we're having today that we will determine if a reprogramming is needed. That would be the final one. I can circle back with you by the end of the day and let you know if there's anything else coming.
And how much would that be roughly? 10 million, 110 million?
5 to 7.
So year-end closing is 2, maybe 3 reprogrammings?
Yes. For the big citywide ones, right? I mean, there are agencies that are submitting smaller reprogrammings that, are also tied to year end, but in terms of the big citywide reprogrammings that we're here to talk about today, it's the one that we're here about. It's the 18.8 million and maybe another 5 to 7 million one. We should know by the end of the day if
Well,
that's
what are these
necessary.
smaller ones? Are they like DGS within DGS or?
Correct. They're within agencies. So they're making sure things are in the right spot as we get to year end. Is that a fair?
Yeah, they're tidying things up a bit, moving things around so that they don't show a deficit in certain areas. So they're going to be more than 98% within an agency. That's what you're going to see. More than 98% of those are going to be within the agency.
So what happens if we disapprove this reprogramming? The government is still balanced.
Yes.
We're just moving money from here to there. So what happens if we disapprove the reprogramming?
So for those agencies that, for example, police, if you disapprove a reprogramming that has police in it, MPD, they will have an anti-deficiency violation. They
Well, that
will
would
end the
be-
year in a deficit.
Arguably, that would be true for any of these.
Could be. Yes.
Okay, and then it would go to Brad V.
Yes.
And what's wrong with that?
I don't have an opinion.
Ms. Reed?
Well, I do. I don't, I think that the reprogramming tool exists for a reason, right? The reprogramming, we have 2 tools to be able to respond to changing needs throughout the year. And
What are the 2 tools?
the supplemental,
Mhm.
and then the end of the reprogrammings. When we submit the budget to council, in April, we are required by CFO to budget for all known spending pressures at that time, and we do. And that is what you see in the supplemental. There are some new policy decisions there, but if there are known spending pressures, we budget for them. The budget is then at council from April through June. By the time things get wrapped up and the numbers get put back to agencies, that's usually around July. During that window, there are new pressures that emerge, right? Or things that we've been watching that come to fruition. So we have to begin planning for how we're going to address that. Council is not required to budget for known spending pressures when it finishes the budget, as we are. I also lose visibility into a lot of the agencies while council has the budget. Because if I'm going poking around, right, CFO is going to tell me, council has the budget. You can't be making changes while council has the budget. So it's really not until July that I can then again start looking at what are things that we could do to address these pressures. The council also takes recess and we are not allowed to submit reprogrammings during that time. So I can't actually submit anything to you until you come back in September. And that's why you see these end of year reprogrammings coming in at this time. I don't think it's appropriate that I would ask that the council not disapprove this, because I do think that we have done the work to make sure that the agencies can end the year not anti-deficient. And we are making sure we're still staying within the overall resources of the district, but we are moving them to where they are needed. And unfortunately, it is nearly impossible for me to do that earlier based on how our budget process works. It is also very difficult to know all of the spending pressures by the beginning of Q3, which is when we submit the budget to council. At this point, we've got 2 quarters under our belt. And you know, because I've heard you say this, things become a lot clearer as we move farther into the fiscal year.
So let me give a different perspective. The CFO says on June 30th that there's $243 million in additional revenues we didn't expect. And I propose the council budget 60 million of it, actually 30 million of it. And the CFO says you can't touch a single penny, including the 30 million. You have to roll back to 30 million because of overspending by agencies. So there's a direct consequence on what is available for the council to appropriate, and we are the appropriators, not the mayor. We are the appropriators. So that's another perspective. And when you say, well, there's nothing you can do for the 2-3 months, because that's sort of a different argument. Your first argument is sort of like, well, this is all kind of harmless. These agencies, these unforeseen needs, this is all kind of harmless, but actually it literally deducts $243 million from what the council can appropriate and gets spent, not appropriated, spent by the executive. That's one argument. The second is you said that, well, you really can't see what's going on between March and July, August, when we're in recess. But actually, they're the FRPs that tell you where there are spending pressures. So you get an FRP for each agency at the end of March, and you get another one at the end of June.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2 shots at seeing overspending during that window when you said you can't see anything.
So it's not that I can't see where the pressures are. It's I can't see where we can pull money from in order to cover the pressures. Because council's making changes to the budget at that time. And the FRPs are not, the quarter ends in March. The FRPs typically come out about 30 days later.
Do you have
Am I
the same-
correct with that?
Right, so the
Same problem-
FRP.
hold on, do you have the same problem we have, which is that the FRPs aren't always available?
So the FRPs are typically available about 30 days after the quarter ends. That's that's my understanding.
How do
Yeah,
you
so-
get them? Because we don't.
So just very high level, the process is that as soon as the fiscal year begins, we start looking into tracking agencies and tracking spending. Prior to the FRPs being published, we get a sense of what potential preliminary spending pressures are. We work with the agencies, we work with Jenny's group, but we don't have the official spending pressure until the FRP comes out. We have what we start tracking spending to see if it's at a higher rate than it was anticipated. But the official document is the FRP. But we do get a preliminary look into
Yeah,
spending.
I'm only responding to the argument that this information isn't available. Now, I get you corrected it and said you can see where the overspending is, but you can't see where money is available. I still think that agencies can be doing more to spend within their budget.
So I want to make sure, you know, in the initial sort of alternative view that you proposed, we do take spending pressures very seriously, right? That is why, as I've been describing these pressures to you and what occurred in 25, I've also been describing to you what is being changed or what we may still see in FY 26, what we know is solved, how we know is solved it, and what areas we need to work together on, because we want to make sure that we do everything that we can so that we don't have these pressures. At the same time, there are things that we have to respond to. And so that is what you are seeing in these reprogrammings. There are circumstances that happen that we responded to. And you asked the question earlier, well, can't the agency just absorb it? If the agencies absorb these costs, there would be significant operational impacts to these agencies. And so if an
Then
agent,
why are we under budgeting them?
so I do think, as I mentioned, many of these things occurred in the fiscal year after the budget had already been approved, right? We didn't know the federal government was going to change the rules around IDCR. We didn't know that capital bike share revenues were going to come in less than projected and that utilization was going to be a lot higher. Now, I've talked at length about overtime because that is one where we are going to be making some changes in the upcoming budget formulation.
Yeah, but I don't agree that it's that mysterious to the experts to be able to project what the spending is for capital bike share. And if the spending significantly changes, significantly, so the agency can't absorb it, then maybe they need to make some changes to the program to save the money in that year. You've said they've made some changes, but not enough for that year. What is capital bike share is 1.6, although at the time you thought it was 7
7.
million.
Mhm.
Well, that says to me right there that there were things the agency could do, but we have right now a bill I'm trying to move through the council that adjusts the pay scales for the ECE educators. Because we budgeted 70 million. We didn't budget 80 million.
I believe it was
we wanna make them-
72.5.
Roughly. You're right.
Mhm.
And there's another 1.5 million in contingency,
Mhm.
which Eric will make available to us. And, but we're going to make changes to the program to cover it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We work
so
with you on those.
We have that discipline. Yeah, I did say that. And I'm not persuaded that the agencies can't have the discipline to absorb.
So the changes that you referenced came after we had proposed making changes to the program to take effect a year later. In that case, we could see the pressure coming, right? In this case, with capital bike share, when the pressures emerge in the middle of the year, sometimes the programmatic changes that you want to make don't take effect right away. Like you don't
Sure.
see the savings in that same day. A great example of that is DHS. We have been working for months and months and months to try to bring the cost of rapid rehousing into alignment. And every time we tried to take steps to do that, we couldn't, because there was a legislative change that was made that prohibited us from taking the steps that we had planned to take to achieve those savings. So now we had to scramble and find $47 million in order to be able to support that program. We made additional changes for FY '26 that thankfully, thank you, the council did accept, and we should now have a program that is more right-sized. But had that legislative change not passed, we wouldn't have had that pressure. And we were not able to address it with programmatic changes right away. Sometimes things take statutory changes. Sometimes things take rulemaking.
Yeah.
Those things take
Don't
time.
go too far down that road. The FSRP, is that what it's called? FS?
FRSP.
FRSP. So one of the proposals, which was not this year, I think it was a year ago, was essentially to be able to evict without due process. That just wasn't going to fly. I mean, yeah, the council rejected that proposal, but it was not a reasonable proposal.
The change that
Hold on.
Okay.
Last year, sorry, I don't mean to be rude.
No.
Last year, I met with the then director of DHS and I said, why don't we stop entries, putting new people in FRSP? And the answer was, we can't do that. We absolutely cannot do that. DHS is doing it now. They put a freeze on new entries in June or July.
July and August.
Yeah, well, absolutely couldn't do it 2 years ago. But now the department proposed that. I'm just saying that it's not so simple as with the council as simple as, well, the council just simply hasn't been willing to the council's gotten in the way.
I'm
The
not,
council did not get in the way of saying due process is a right that individuals have. And the council did not get in the way in saying you ought to freeze the program.
so I am not saying that the council is responsible for all of these pressures. What I am saying is that there are a variety of circumstances that happen. Some done by council, some that are imposed by things none of us can control, some that are driven by policy choices. But at the end of the day, we make sure that we transmit a balanced budget to you, and that for things that arise, that's halfway through the fiscal year, for things that arrive in the latter half of the fiscal year, we take steps to make sure that the district and its agencies can end the year balanced. We do not expect a lot of these pressures to continue. As I've talked through at this roundtable, the steps that we have taken to mitigate these things going forward. What I can't say is that there will never be any cost increases in agency budgets throughout the fiscal year, because the world changes and we have to be able to respond to that.
So I have, I think, one more question. The questions always kind of come in groups. Why is it that there is $184 million available from debt service?
$184 million?
Correct.
Oh, you're talking about what was included in supplement. So I'm going
It's
to
a lot of money.
substantial amount of money. Of course, I can't provide you the details on that because that's going to have to come from the Office of Treasury. I can talk about the 100 million only briefly. Only can tell you is that was a timing in the borrowing schedule. They anticipated borrowing sooner than they could have, and then they ended up having to borrow later than they had anticipated. And so the payment for that debt service or that borrowing got pushed out into 25, but Didn't-
26.
26, I'm sorry, got pushed out to 26, but that, if you want details, we can respond as an organization to that. I don't, I can't give you the level of detail that I think you probably want.
You could follow up. So
Yes.
Ms. Reed's got 3 homework assignments. You could have 1.
I got one. Okay.
And your 3 are Councilmember Bonds, which I also have. Explaining energy. And something regarding DPW.
Positions, whether or not there were positions taken from DPW in 25.
Yes. Any other question? Did I overwork? I don't have any other questions for you. Thank you, each of you.
Thank you.
As
Thank
I
you.
said at the beginning, this has been a hearing on reprogramming request disapproval resolution PR 26-342. The record in this matter will be open for a week. That is, it will close at 5 PM on Thursday, October 23rd. The time is 2:59 PM and this roundtable is adjourned.